This video is sponsored by DevMountain. If you're interested in learning web development, iOS, or UX design, DevMountain is a 12-week design and development bootcamp intended to get you a full-time position in the industry. To learn more, visit devmountain.com or click the link in the description below. Hey, what's going on, guys? So I've had a bunch of requests over the past few months to continue my Learn the Mern Stack series on YouTube, where we used Node.js and Express on the back end, created a shopping list API, and then created a front end with React and Redux and connected them together. We also used React Strap, which is a package that allows us to create Bootstrap components as React components. So what I want to do in the next few videos is implement authentication. That's the main request that I've gotten, is to add JWT or JSON Web Tokens so that we can protect certain routes, and then we can log in to get or register to get a token, and then we'll send that token to the backend to access protected routes. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. It's quite a bit of code. We're going to start off with the backend, implement it there, and then we'll move to React. So it'll probably be 3, maybe even 4 videos. Now, in this series, we used MLab, which is a service that offers remote MongoDB databases, and MLab is now owned by MongoDB. So what you want to do if you're going to follow along is create an account at mongodb.com, and you want to use Atlas, which is the remote MongoDB service. So you just create an account, log in, and create a new cluster. And once you do that, if you hit connect and then hit right here, you'll see it will give you a connection string. So that's what you want to use in your application. All right, now this is the GitHub repository, which I'm just going to clone, and I'm going to go from there. Okay, so it's basically where we left off. The only difference is I did update the client. I did update React to use version 2 of Create React App. So I'm going to jump into VS Code, and I already have the command here to just clone the repository. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to clone it into this folder. And I want to install my dependencies on both the client side and the server side. So let's go ahead and run npm install. And this is on the server side, so it's going to be installing Express, Mongoose concurrently, which is used to run the front end and back end at the same time, and then body parser, which we actually don't even need anymore because Express includes a body parser. But that installed those, so now let's cd into the client folder, which is where React lives, and let's install our dependencies there as well. And if we look in client, we look at package.json, it's installing all this stuff. So React scripts, React, of course, React DOM, React Redux, React Strap and Bootstrap, Axios, so we can make requests. So it's going to install all that stuff on the client side. All right, and then I think the first thing we should do is create our user model on the server side so that we can actually register users. And if we look at the package.json on the server, we have a script. We have a few scripts. One will run the server with NodeMon, one will run the client, and then npm run dev will actually run both using concurrently. So we set all this stuff up in the series, so if you want to create all this stuff from scratch, then go ahead and watch that series. Okay, so let's cd ... back into, let's see, are we in the root here? Yep, so let's run npm run dev. So this should run the back end and the front end. Let's see, what was that? Invalid connection string, Mongo parse error. Oh, I didn't put my MongoDB connection string in. So it'll run, but it's not actually connected to any database. So I'm going to just jump over to MongoDB Atlas, hit connect to your application, and I'm going to just copy this string right here. And if we go back and we go into, in the back end, we want to go into config keys.js and put in the Mongo URI. We also need to put in the password and save, and now that should work. There we go. All right, so let's see, could not proxy request. Should have a proxy in here. If we look in client package.json, We have our proxy. Let me just restart this. Okay, so it looks good. Let's go back. And now we should be able to access our database, which there's nothing in there, but we should be able to add an item. So let's try that out. So we'll just say eggs, add item, and there we go. Let's say chicken. Okay, and we're using React Transition Group to get that fade effect. And again, if you want to create this application how it is now from scratch, just go through the series. So if I go to my cluster here, and actually we want to click on collections, you'll see that now there's an items collection that has eggs and chicken in it. Okay, so we're connected to the database. So we're basically in the spot where we left off. So now let's jump in and let's create our user model. So under models, you'll see we have our item.js, which just has a name and a date. Let's create a file here called user.js. And I'm just going to copy the item schema here, or the item model, and paste that in here. And we'll change this to user schema. And down here, we want to make sure we change this variable to user, and then this to user, and this to user schema. All right, and then we just want to put the fields that we want. So I do want a name. I'm going to keep that, and then I'll just go ahead and copy this down 2 more times because we need an email. And for the email, I'm also going to say that I want this to be unique. So we'll say unique is true. And then this field is going to be the password. So we'll go ahead and change that to password. And that should be good. Well, let's actually change this to, we'll say register date. And that's just going to put the current date in. Okay, so whenever they register, it'll put that date and time in. So let's save that. We now have our user model. And we want to have some routes. Okay, we want a route to be able to register a user. So in the routes folder, we have API as a folder, and then our items that has all of our items routes. Inside API, I'm also going to create a file called users.js. Okay, and now in our server.js, we have to add that file as a route. So what I did here for items is I set a variable to the routes file, and then down at the bottom right here, I said app use API/items and use that variable. Now I'm going to cut this down a little bit and just put this required directly in instead of creating a separate variable. I'm just going to put the require right in here. All right, and then we'll copy that down, and we want one for users. So API/users is going to go to that users route file. Okay, it's going to give me an error because there's nothing in that file. We need to actually implement the express router and all that stuff. So let's go into users.js, and I'll actually copy items.js real quick. Everything we have in items.js and the routes, and paste that in. Because we want to bring in Express, we want the router, we want the user model. So we'll change this to user, and this will be models/user. And then we want a route to register, which I want the route to be /API/users, which is going to be this route here. So let's change this to API/users, and this is going to register new user. It's going to be public, and then I'm just going to get rid of everything in here for now, and let's just do a res.send, and we'll just say register just to test it out. And then I'm going to get rid of every other route here, these other 2. Okay, make sure that you're exporting the router as well. So if I save that, now we don't get an error. Now this warning right here is from Mongoose. It says collection.ensure index is deprecated. Use create indexes instead. So if we want to fix that, if we don't want to see that warning anymore, we can go over to server.js, and right here where we connect to MongoDB with Mongoose, this second parameter with this object, we have this use new URL parser. I'm just going to add to that, and I'm going to say use create index, and we want to set that to true. Okay, so that should get rid of that error. All right, now we have our register route. Let's test it out. We're going to be using Postman, so I'm going to open up Postman, which you can get at, I believe, getpostman.com. And we want to make we want this to be a post request. So we want to change that and that to post. Okay, and then let's do post to HTTP localhost 5000 /API/users. And if we send that, we get a response back, a 200 response that just says register. Okay, so we know that we can access that route. So let's continue on here and let's actually register a user. Obviously, we're going to have to send some data. Now, Express, the latest version of Express includes a body parser. Back when we did this, we had to, this is the server.js file, we had to install body parser separately and then add the middleware. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of this. And instead of this, we're going to do express.json. All right, and then we can actually remove that package. We no longer need it. So I'm just going to stop the server down here and do an npm remove of body parser because we no longer need it. Okay, so another thing I want to do is install. Let's see, I'm going to install bcrypt because we're going to want to hash our passwords when we register a user. So let's do bcrypt. We're actually going to use bcrypt.js. You can use the standard bcrypt, but I always run into issues with it, dependency issues and stuff, especially on Windows. So especially if you're on Windows, I'd suggest using bcrypt.js. So let's do run dev again. Actually, you know what? We don't even need to do run dev because we're not dealing with React right now. So I'm actually going to do run server, which will just run the backend. So npm run server. All right, so now let's head back into our users route here. And we're going to be getting the data in request.body. Right? So what I'm going to do is just use some destructuring, and I'm going to pull out some values from that. So let's pull out the name, email, and password. So whatever we pass along as the name, email, and password, they're now in variables. And I'm just going to do some simple validation here. So we'll do if, let's say, if not name or not email or not password, then let's send a response. So we're going to return res.status. We want to send a status of 400, which is a bad request. It means that the user didn't send the correct info to get the correct response. And then we'll just add on some JSON, and let's just pass in a message, and we'll say, please enter all fields. Okay, now if they do send the name, email, and password, let's go ahead and check for existing user. So to do that, we're going to use the user model. Okay, we're using Mongoose, and we're going to use the find one method, and we want to find by email. So we pass in an object. We want to say we want to look for the email that's equal to the email variable. And since these are the same, I can simply just do that. Okay, and then that's going to give us a promise back. So we'll do .then. If you want to use a sync await, you can, but I'm not going to use a sync await. And then in here, this is going to give us a user, possibly if there is one. And if there is one, then we want to send a 400 response saying there's already a user registered with that email. So let's say if a user, so basically this will be null if there's not one. If there is, it'll return the user. So we want to check for it. Actually, we don't even need, we can put this all on one line. So if there's a user, then let's return res.status 400.json. Oops. And in here, let's just put message. Jesus, I can't type. Let's put a message, and we'll just say user already exists. Okay, so if a user doesn't exist, then we want to create a new user. So I'm going to create a variable called new user, set it to new, and then our user model, pass in an object, and we want to add the name, the email, and the password, which are getting pulled from the data that's sent to the endpoint. Okay, now this user has a password that is not hashed. We obviously don't want to put that in the database. So we want to bring in bcrypt, which we already installed. So let's say const bcrypt, and we want to set that to require. And remember, we're using bcrypt.js, so we want to make sure we say bcrypt.js. Okay, now down underneath where we created this new user object, we want to do a couple things. We want to generate what's called a salt, which is used to create a hash, okay, a password hash from a plain text password, and that's what we want to put in the database. So let's say hash, we'll say create salt, and create salt and hash. Okay, so we'll take bcrypt, and we're going to call gen salt, and this takes in the number of rounds we want to use. The higher, the more secure, but it also takes longer. The default is 10, so I'm just going to use that. And then it takes a callback function, so I'm going to use an arrow function. It takes in an error, and then, or a possible error, and then the salt. Okay, so once we get the salt, we can then call bcrypt.hash, and this bcrypt hash is going to take in a couple things. It takes in the plain text password, which is going to be this new user.password. So we'll pass in new user.password. Then it takes in the salt that was generated, so we'll pass that in, and then a callback with a possible error and the hash. Okay, now once we get the hash, we will actually, let's check for the error first. So if there's an error, we'll just go ahead and stop it and throw the error. Okay, then we want to save the new user, the password, which was plain text. We want to now save it to be the hash. Okay, and then we can actually save the user in the database. So we'll do new user.save. Okay, we're going to use new user save, and then that's going to give us a promise back. And in here, it'll give us the user, and then we can decide what we want to do once we save it, which, since this is basically a REST API, we want to just send a response back. Ultimately, we're going to generate a token here and send the token and the user, but for now, we're just going to send the user. So let's say res.json. I'm going to have an object with a user object. We'll have the token as well later on, but for now we'll just have the user. And I don't want to send the entire user back with the password, so we want the name. Actually, let's do the ID as well. So user.id, username, and then let's do email. Okay, so it'll send that stuff back, and we should be good. So we'll save that, and let's try and register a user. So we'll go back to Postman, and we already have our request here, but we need to add some data to register with, because right now, if I try it, we get please enter all fields. So in order to send data, we need to go to our headers and set a content type. Let's set a content type of application/JSON. And then in the body, we'll choose raw JSON. And let's put in our double quotes here. Let's send a name. So for name, we'll just do me. Oops. And let's put a comma here, and then we want email. I'm just going to do brad@gmail, and then a password. So obviously we put in our plain text password. I'm going to do 1 2 3 4 5 6, but it should get hashed. So let's send, and then we get a response back, 200 response with the user ID, name, and email. And if we head over to Atlas and I reload, we should have a users collection, which we do. And if we look in users collection, we have the user we just registered, and take a look at the password. It's completely hashed. All right, so we now have the ability to register a user. So now what we want to do is implement tokens. Okay, I want to make it so that when we register, we get a token just like when we log in, so that we can immediately log in from our front end. So if we go to JWT.io, this tells us a little bit about what JSON Web Tokens are, and I actually have a video on JWT where I just kind of explain it a little bit. I give you a basic example in Node without a database, but basically it looks like this. So it's easy to send back and forth, and it has three parts to it. It has the header, which has the algorithm and then the token type. It has the payload, so we can send any data that we want with it. So a lot of times it'll have an issued at, which is the time that it was created. You can also have an expires, which we'll do. So it expires at a certain time. You could send, usually you send the user's ID or the name, some other data. And then it has the signature. Okay, it has the encrypted signature. So those are the three different parts, and you can see that they're actually highlighted here in the token. And you can take any token and put it in here, and it will show you that info. All right, now in order to generate one of these things, we have to use a package called JSON Web Tokens. So let's jump over to VS Code and let's stop the server and let's do npm install JSON Web Token. All right, and then we'll just do npm run server. Actually, you know what? I'm going to install something else here just to deal with configs. Right now, I have any keys or whatever config values I have in this keys.js, which isn't the best way to handle this. You definitely don't want to, if you're pushing your code to GitHub, you don't want to have this kind of stuff in there. I'm not going to go over that kind of stuff like security too much here. Just know that usually you want to put this stuff in environment variables on your server, and you don't want this clearly exposed in your repository. And I'm mentioning this because to use JWT, we need to have a secret, a JWT secret, and I'm also going to put that in the config. So I'm going to install a package here called config so that we can handle this a little differently. And we'll go ahead and run the server. Instead of having this keys.js, I'm going to have a JSON file inside config called default. So default.json. Okay, and in this default.json, we're going to have a JSON object with any secrets, any API keys, connection strings, stuff like that. So let's put our Mongo URI in here. So I'm just going to grab that from the keys.js and put that right in here. And then I'm also going to put in a JWT secret value, and I'll just set that to, I don't know, SL, which is shopping list, underscore my JWT secret. It doesn't really matter what this is. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to actually delete the keys.js file. So now in server.js, down here where we connected to MongoDB, let's see, where's the URL? We put it right here in this DB variable. We use that keys file, and then we just use that Mongo URI value. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to bring in config. Okay, and now I can simply do, instead of this, I can do config.get and then pass in Mongo URI. Oh, I forgot the quote. Okay, so we can now get our config values with config.get, which is a little bit cleaner. So let's save that, and then let's go back to users, and we're going to bring in config here as well because we need that JWT secret. So let's say const config equals require config, and then we also want JSON Web Tokens. So let's bring that in. We'll say const JWT equals require JSON Web Token. All right, now down where we did the register, we're going to want to change this up a little bit. So this is all the same, the hashing. We're going to save the user, and then in the response is where we want to also create the token. So right above where we did the res.json, I'm going to take the JSON Web Token and I'm going to call .sign. Okay, so we want to sign the token, and the first parameter is going to be the payload that we want to add. So this could be absolutely anything you want. What I want it to be is the user ID. So I'm going to say it's going to be a JSON object with ID, and I'm going to set it to user.id. So that way, when we send a token from React or from Postman, wherever it's coming from, the user ID is in there so that it knows which user it is. Okay. Otherwise, any token could access anything. So you want to make sure that you send that ID and you verify it to do certain things. Okay, so that's the payload, and you could add more stuff if you wanted, the name and stuff like that. All right, the next parameter is going to be the secret. So let's do config.get, and we want to get the JWT secret value. Now, this next one is optional. It's if you want it to expire, and I do. I'm going to say expires in, and I'm going to set it to 3600. All right. So what I did here is set it to an hour, so 3600 seconds. So this token will only last for an hour, and it's up to you, if you want to set it longer, or if you don't even, sometimes you won't even have an expires. Now, the next parameter is going to be the callback, okay, because this is asynchronous. You can also do this in a synchronous way, but I like to use asynchronous. So on the next line here, let's put a callback. This will give us a possible error, and then the token. Okay, so we're going to set that, and let's see. Let's first just check for the error, and I'm just going to do throw error. Now, this is where we want to send our response. Now, we have our response down here with the user, so I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to put it in here, okay, inside the callback for JWT sign. Now, in addition to the user, I want to send the token, so I'm just going to simply add token, which is the same as doing token equals token. Okay, so once we register, not only will it give us the user back, it should give us a token so that we can then authenticate with private routes, which we haven't set up yet. Okay, in many past tutorials, like in my Mern stack course, we used Passport.js. We used that middleware to create private routes and all that, but I'm actually going to show you how we can write just very simple custom middleware to handle that. But before we do anything else, let's test this out. So let's make sure that this is saved, and then let's go back and let's try to register a new user. I'm actually going to delete the user from that we just created, just so I don't fill up my database here. Okay, so now we have no users in the database, and let's see, we'll go back to Postman. And let's do the same thing. We're sending a post request to API users, and I'm adding the same data in the body, the name, email, password, although this time we should get a token back as well. So let's send, we'll register, and if we check it out, we have the user and we also have the token. Now, if I take this token, which again is broken up into 3 separate parts, and I go to jwt.io and I paste this in here, and we take a look, we have the header. Let's look at our payload. We have the ID. So this is the ID of the user. All right. And we have the issued at and then the expiration, which is an hour from now. Okay. Now, just to make sure this is the ID of our user, let's see, it's 5C7FE. If we look in our database, let's reload. We should see our user and 5C7FE. So it's the same ID as the user. So we want to make sure that that's in the payload. All right, so we have our registration down. Now we also want to be able to authenticate and get a token as well. So to log in and get a token. So let's go back to VS Code. Now, if you want to put your authentication stuff in the same routes file, the user's routes, you can do that. However, I'm going to create a new file in routes/API just called auth.js. Okay, so I'm going to just copy everything from the user's route and paste that in here. So, because we want to bring in most of this, all of this stuff actually. And then let's see, we want to bring in our user model, and then let's have a route that is a post request to API/auth. So this is going to authenticate the user. It's going to be public. Obviously, it's going to be public because this is the way that we actually get the token, so that we can then send it along to private routes. And then we're going to just grab the email and the password. No need for the name. Validation, we'll just check for email and password. So same thing, please enter all fields. So we'll go down, we'll check for the user by the email. Now, if there's not a user, that's when we want to send back an error. So we're going to say if not user, return 400, and we're going to say user does not exist. Okay, so user does not exist. And then we don't need this. Let's see. So instead of generating a hash here, we need to actually compare the plain text password that's sent with the body request to the hashed password in the database, which comes from here. So user.password. So I'm just going to get rid of all of this. Even though we will be doing some of the same stuff, I'm just going to get rid of this whole block here. Okay, so let's see. We're going to start off by validating the password. So let's say validate password. And we're going to use bcrypt. And there's a method called compare. Now, this compare takes in password, which is our plain text password that's sent in, and we want to compare it to the user.password, which is the hashed password. Okay, now this returns a promise, so we'll do .then, and this will give us a Boolean, which I'm going to say is match. So does it match or not? Okay, now if it doesn't match, then obviously they're not going to, we don't want them to authenticate, so we'll say if not match, then let's return a response status of 400 because it's a bad request since it's not a correct login, and we'll say JSON, and we'll say message invalid credentials. All right, now if it does match, then that means that it's a correct login. So in that case, we want to send the token and the user just like we did in our registration. So I'm just going to grab from users.js. I want to grab this whole JWT sign with the response inside the callback. So it ends right here. So I'm just going to grab that chunk and I'm going to put that right here. Okay, so again, we're signing the token, we're passing in the user ID as a payload, we fetch the user here, so we're passing the ID, and then we get our secret, it's going to expire in an hour, we have our callback, and then we send a response with a token and a user. Okay, so that should do it. Let's save, and let's go back to Postman, and now let's make a, actually I'll use this one. So instead of a post request to API users, we want to do API/auth. And as far as the body goes, we don't need a name because we're not creating a user, we're just validating. But let's do a user that doesn't exist, like brad1@gmail. Okay, so if we go ahead and we send that, oh, we never made the file available to the route. So we need to actually go to server.js, and just like we did with the other two routes right here, we need to bring in API auth and API auth. Okay, so let's try that again. And we get a response that says user does not exist. Now, if we do brad@gmail, which does exist, and we do a password that's wrong, we get invalid credentials. So let's try with the password that's right and send, and we get a token and we get the user. So same response whether we register or whether we authenticate if we log in. So this makes it pretty easy on the front end. All right, now the last part of this is to create the middleware so that we can have private routes that are only accessed if we send along this token. Okay, so what we'll do here is create our own middleware. So let's see, we want to be in the root. I'm just going to close all this stuff. And in the root, let's create a folder called middleware. And inside here, we'll create a file called auth.js. Okay, so in this file, we want to bring in our JSON Web Token. We also want to bring in config. So I'm going to bring that in first. Okay, and then we'll bring in JSON Web Token. We'll set that to JWT. Okay, so we're just going to create a middleware function and just call it auth. And when you have a middleware function, you want to pass in three things: the request, the response, and next. Okay, when you're done with whatever this piece of middleware does, you want to call next to move on to the next middleware. Okay, now remember the purpose of this function here is to get the token that's sent from either React or Postman, Angular, whatever front end you're using, where it's going to send along a token. So let's create a variable here called token, and we want to fetch that from the header. So the header values are in requests, so request header, and we're going to send it in x-auth-token. So that's the header value we want to check for the token. Okay, so we'll say check for token, and we'll say if there's no token that's x-auth-token, then we're going to send along, let's say res.status. Now this status is different. This is a 401 status, which means that you don't have the correct permissions, or what the hell is it? How do I explain it? 401 status. Status unauthorized. That's the word I was looking for. So we're saying that the user is unauthorized. Okay, so let's also send some JSON, and we'll just send a message that says no token, authorization denied. Okay, so actually I don't even need curly braces because this can be a single line. Now if there is a token, then we need to verify it. Okay, so let's say verify token, and the way that we do that is I'm going to create a variable called decoded and set that to JWT.verify, and we want to pass in that token. Okay, and this also takes in that JWT secret, so we can say config.get and JWT secret. All right, now we want to take the user from the token, okay, because remember we set the ID, it's sending the user ID, and we want to put that into request.user. So that way whenever the token is sent, we have that user stored in the request value. All right, so let's say add user to, or let's just say add user from payload. So request.user, because you can set any request variables in your middleware functions, and we want to set it to decoded. Okay, and then we just want to call next, which will call the next piece of middleware. Now actually what I want to do is wrap this in a TryCatch, because if the token isn't valid, then we don't want to do that. We want to send back an error response. So let's just do try. Let's say TryCatch, and we'll have our exception. and then we'll just take this and let's grab, actually there's two, and let's move this up into the try block. And then in the catch, we're going to do a res.status. This will be a 400 request because it's a bad request, or 400 response because it's a bad request. And then we'll just send JSON, and let's do message, and we'll say token is not valid. Okay, now the last thing we want to do is export this middleware. So we'll say module dot exports equals auth, and that's it. So now whenever we want a private route, we can simply add this piece of middleware as the second parameter in the endpoint. So for instance, let's go to our items routes. So routes API items, and what I want is the post here to create a new item, and the delete, I want them to have to be authenticated. So what we'll do is bring in our middleware. So we'll say const auth equals, and we just want to set this to require. We want to go, let's see, .. outside of API, outside of routes. Actually, we need quotes around this. So outside of routes, and then into middleware, and then we want the auth file. Okay, and then all we have to do to protect this post request right here to create a new item is simply add auth as a second parameter, just like that. Okay, it's for same thing for delete. We just want to add auth. So now those routes should be protected. So if I go back to Postman and I try to add an item, let's make a post request, and let's do HTTP localhost 5000 /API/items, and I want to add, let's see, headers is going to be content type application JSON, and then for the body we want to send raw JSON, and we just want to send a name. I believe it's a name. So a name of, let's say, steak. So I'm going to send this and check out what we get. A 401 unauthorized response, and it says no token, authorization denied. So in order to do this, we need to have the token. So let's go back here, and this is the route to actually log in and get the token. Sorry about that. And I'll press send, and then we have our token. So I'm going to copy this, go back to our post request to add the item, and we're going to add in the headers a value here of x-auth-token. So we would do this within React or Angular or Vue, whatever it is we're using on the front end, and then we want to set the value to the token. Okay, so now I'm going to send, and it gets added. Okay, and just to make sure, if we go to Atlas and we go to items, we should have steak, and there it is. Now the last thing we want to do is we want to create a route inside Auth.js, because in this route what it's going to do is check for the current user, get the current user's data by using the token. The reason we want to do this is because JWT authentication is stateless. Okay, it's not like using sessions where you have authentication data stored in memory or whatever on the server. You just send your token, it decodes it, and then it sends you the response. So we need a way to constantly validate the user that's logged in our front end. So we need a route that's just going to take the token and then return the user data. So in Auth.js, I want to bring in our auth middleware. So I'm going to say const auth, set that to require. And let's see, where are we? So we're in, I want to go outside of API, outside of routes, into middleware, and then auth. Okay, and then down here, I'm going to copy this little comment block here. Okay, so this route is going to be a GET request to API/auth/user, and let's just say get user data, and this is going to be private. In fact, I forgot to set in the items routes, delete is now private, and so is post. Okay, so they're protected or private, whatever. So back here, let's create, let's say router, and it's going to be a GET request. And remember, we're in the auth file, so we just have to do /user. We want it to be protected, so we'll add the auth middleware, and then our request and response. And we're going to take our user model, we're going to call find by ID, and we just need to pass in the ID. Now we can get that by doing request.user.id, and I don't want to return the password, so I can simply do .select and then just do pass in here hyphen password. Okay, so that will just disregard the password, and then this will give us a response, and we want to, it'll give us the user, it will give us a promise with the user, and then we want to just send that user, okay, and it will minus the password. And that's it. So that will validate the user with the token. So let's try this out in Postman. So I'm going to take this token. So this is the token that belongs to the Brad Traversy user. So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to make a GET request to HTTP localhost 5000 /API/auth/user, and I want to attach a headers value of x-auth-token and pass that token, and then it should give me the user that this token belongs to. So if I send, there we go, we get the user minus the password. Now if I authenticate with a different user, I think we have, did we register any other users? I don't know. Let's register a user real quick. So if we go post request to users, and let's just do like John@gmail, send, please enter all fields. That's right, because this is registration, we need to add a name. Okay, so we'll send that, and now this token should reveal that this is the John Doe user. So if I go back to this auth user and I put in this token, oops, I just want to replace this and send, now we get John Doe. So you can see that it knows what user it is based on the token because of the ID that's embedded in it in the payload. All right, so hopefully this wasn't too confusing, and I know this was a long video, but like I said, this stuff it's not that easy really, especially dealing with the front end and the back end together. So at least we have the back end all set. So in the next video, we're going to start to work in React. We're still using our shopping list application. We need to create a login and register component so that we can send this data, so that we can get a token, and we can send that if we want to access a private route. We'll implement an auth reducer in Redux, and we'll go from there. All right, so thanks guys, thank you for watching, and if you do like this stuff, please leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one.